He wasn't supposed to be remembered, and yet the room forgot how to breathe the moment he stepped inside. It was a quiet hall in Arlington, polished wood floors reflecting rows of dress blues and folded flags, the kind of place where every sound carried farther than it should, where even a chair shifting felt like a confession. The ceremony had already begun, names being read in steady cadence, medals resting in velvet-lined boxes, everything precise, controlled, expected. And then the door opened without announcement. No escort, no introduction, just an old man in a worn coat, moving slower than the rhythm of the room allowed, as if time had never quite caught up with him. Most people didn't turn. Why would they? He didn't look like a man who belonged to anything official. No events, no polished shoes, just a quiet presence that didn't ask for space, but somehow altered it anyway. Staff Sergeant Daniel Hayes noticed first, not because he was looking for anything unusual, but because something in the air shifted, like pressure before a storm you can't see yet. He was seated in the third row, back straight, hands resting on his knees, eyes forward the way training had carved into muscle memory. But when the old man crossed the threshold, Daniel's gaze broke formation. It wasn't the way he walked. It wasn't even his face. It was something harder to name. A stillness. A weight. Like a story that had never been told, but refused to stay buried. The old man paused near the back, unsure where to stand, his eyes scanning the room, not with confusion, but with recognition, as if he had been here before in a different life, under a different sky. Daniel felt it before he understood it. His chest tightened, subtle but undeniable. He stood, not halfway, not uncertain, fully. The motion was clean, instinctive like a reflex older than thought. His chair scraped softly against the floor, the sound cutting through the ceremony just enough to turn a few heads. And then, without waiting for permission, without looking around, Daniel raised his hand in a sharp, unwavering salute. The room didn't follow. Not yet. A few Marines glanced at him, puzzled. This wasn't protocol. No. Command had been given. No honored guest had been announced. The old man stopped mid-step. His eyes met Daniel's. For a second, nothing moved. Not the speaker at the podium. Not the flags. Not even the air. And then something passed between them. Not recognition exactly. Something deeper. The kind of knowing that doesn't come from names or ranks, but from shared silence, from things endured and never spoken aloud. Daniel held the salute. His arm didn't waver. His breath slowed. The world narrowed to that single point of connection. The old man looked down briefly, as if searching for something he had lost a long time ago. His hands, rough and weathered, hovered at his sides. He didn't return the salute. Not because he didn't know how, because something in him hesitated, like a door that hadn't been opened in decades. A murmur rippled through the room, quiet but growing. One Marine shifted in his seat. Another leaned forward. Confusion, curiosity, a hint of discomfort. Why is he standing? Who is that man? But Daniel didn't lower his hand. He couldn't. Something told him that if he did, something important would be lost again. The old man took another step forward, slower now, his eyes never leaving Daniel's. There was a faint tremor in his fingers, barely visible unless you were looking for it. And Daniel was. He noticed everything now. The way the man carried his shoulders, the angle of his chin, the way his weight settled on his heels, balanced, disciplined, even under the weight of years. It wasn't taught anymore. Not like that. Not in this time. A detail out of place. A fragment from another era. The speaker at the podium faltered, words trailing off as attention drifted. The ceremony, once structured and predictable, began to unravel at the edges, not in chaos, but in something quieter, more profound. A shift in gravity. The old man stopped again, just a few feet inside the room. Close enough now that Daniel could see the lines on his face, carved deep not just by age, but by memory. There was no bitterness there, no demand, just a quiet endurance. The kind that doesn't ask to be seen. The kind that survives whether anyone notices or not. Daniel's arm remained raised, steady as steel, but inside, something moved. A question forming. A recognition not yet complete. Why him? Why now? Why does this feel like something unfinished? Around them, The room held its breath, caught between protocol and something older than rules. The old man's lips parted slightly, as if he might speak, but no words came. Instead, his gaze softened, just a fraction, and in that small change, Daniel felt it. Not certainty, not yet, but the beginning of something that would not let go. Before we begin, tell me, where are witching from? Drop your country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The silence does not break all at once. It fractures slowly, like glass under pressure, subtle at first, and then impossible to ignore as eyes begin to turn not toward the podium, but toward the man who refuses to lower his hand and the old veteran who does not yet return it. And in that suspended moment, the rules of the room feel smaller than whatever is unfolding between them. Daniel Hayes keeps his posture locked, shoulders squared, breath measured the way it was taught years ago on training grounds where discipline meant survival. But this is different. This is not about orders or inspection or ceremony. This feels older than all of that. Something instinctive, something earned, and the longer he holds the salute, the more it stops being a gesture and becomes a question that demands an answer. The old man studies him now with a quiet intensity, not startled, not offended, but searching, as if trying to understand why this young Marine is seeing something no one else in the room has noticed. A faint shift in his stance reveals it. Not weakness, but memory in the body. The way his heels settle, the slight lift of his chin, a posture that belongs to a different generation of service. One that has faded from modern drills, but still lingers in those who carried it through years no one talks about anymore. Daniel feels it click into place, not fully, not yet, but enough to keep him rooted. Around him, the ceremony attempts to resume. The speaker clears his throat and continues reading names, but the cadence is off now, uneven, distracted, because attention has been pulled into this quiet orbit forming near the entrance. A Marine 2 seats over leans slightly toward Daniel and whispers under his breath, "What unit is he with?" But Daniel does not answer. He cannot, because the truth is he does not know, and that is what unsettles him most, because everything about this man feels known without being identified. The old veteran takes another step forward, closer now, close enough that the faint scent of worn fabric and cold air follows him inside. His coat hangs loose, unremarkable, but beneath it there is a presence that does not match the simplicity of his appearance. His eyes move across the room briefly, not seeking attention, just taking measure, like a man who has spent a lifetime reading spaces before entering them. And then they return to Daniel, locking again, steady, unflinching. Daniel's arm remains raised, but now there is a subtle tremor beneath the stillness. Not from fatigue, but from the weight of what he is. Beginning to sense something is not right, or maybe something is finally right in a way the room has not yet caught up to. A chair shifts behind him. Another Marine slowly stands, uncertain at first, mirroring Daniel without fully understanding why, then hesitates halfway, as if waiting for correction that never comes. No one commands him to sit. No one tells them to stand. The chain of authority is silent, and in that silence choice begins to spread. The old man notices it too, the way the room is starting to tilt toward him without a word being spoken. His brow tightens slightly, not in confusion, but in recognition of something he has not felt in a very long time. Acknowledgement without explanation. Daniel sees it. The flicker of something behind the veteran's eyes. Something guarded. Something that has learned not to expect this kind of attention, and yet cannot fully ignore it when it arrives. The distance between them closes by another step. The old man's hand lifts slightly from his side, not yet forming a salute, but hovering as if the motion itself has weight, as if it carries more than muscle memory. Daniel does not move. He does not blink. He holds the moment open, giving it space to become whatever it is meant to be. And then a small detail breaks through the tension, something almost invisible, the edge of a thin chain slipping from beneath the veteran's collar, catching the light for just a second before disappearing again. But Daniel sees it, just enough to register that there is more beneath the surface than the room has been told. His mind sharpens, instincts shifting from uncertainty to focus. Whatever this is, it is not random, it is not misplaced, and it is not over. Not even close, because the man standing in front of him is not simply an old veteran who wandered into the wrong room. He is something else entirely, something the room has forgotten how to recognize. And Daniel is beginning to understand that lowering his hand now would mean letting that truth slip back into silence, where it has been buried for far too long. The glint of that thin chain does not leave Daniel's mind. It lingers there like a signal half received, incomplete, but urgent. And as the old man takes one more measured step into the room, the chain slips free again, this time fully, revealing a small set of worn metal tags resting against a faded undershirt. Not polished, not displayed, just carried. The way something important is kept close without needing to be seen. Daniel's eyes drop for only a fraction of a second, but it is enough to catch the engraving, enough to feel the ground shift beneath everything he thought he understood about this moment. His breath slows, sharper now, controlled but deeper, because what he sees does not align with the present. It belongs to records, to archives, to names spoken in past tense. And yet here it is, resting against the chest of a man standing a few feet away, alive, quiet, waiting without asking. Daniel's voice comes before he fully decides to speak, low, steady, carrying just far enough to reach the man without breaking the fragile tension around them. Sir, what unit were you? With the words hang. They're simple, respectful, but loaded with something more, not curiosity alone, not challenge, something closer to confirmation. The old man does not answer immediately. His gaze shifts downward toward the tags. As if he has forgotten, they are visible. His fingers lift slowly and close around them. Instinctive, protective, as though they were never meant for anyone else to see. And in that small motion, Daniel feels it again, that quiet resistance, not refusal, but reluctance born from years of being unseen, unheard, unasked. The room leans in without moving. Marines who were moments ago focused on ceremony now watch in stillness, drawn into something they do not yet understand but cannot ignore. The speaker at the front has stopped entirely now, words abandoned mid-sentence, because whatever is happening here has overridden protocol without a single command. Daniel does not lower his salute. His arm remains raised, but his eyes soften just enough to hold the question open without pressure. The old man exhales slowly, almost silently. And when he finally speaks, his voice is rough with disuse, but steady in its core. I was not assigned to a unit. Not anymore. The answer lands heavier than its words, not because of what it says, but because of what it avoids. Daniel feels the shift immediately, a confirmation hidden inside a deflection, and his mind begins to connect pieces that should not fit together. The date etched faintly on the tag, the structure of the number, the format no longer used, details that only someone trained to notice would catch. And Daniel has been trained, not for this exactly, but for recognizing when something does not belong to the present. He takes a small step forward, closing the distance just enough to see more clearly, still holding the salute, still anchored in respect, but now driven by something deeper, something that feels like responsibility. Sir, your name. The question is quieter now, almost careful, as if speaking too loudly might break whatever truth is trying to surface. The old man's grip tightens slightly around the tags. His jaw sets, not in defiance, but in memory. And for a moment, it seems like he will not answer at all, like the name has not been spoken aloud in years, like saying it might make something real again that was easier left behind. And then, almost under his breath, he says it. Arthur Calloway. The name moves through Daniel like a current, instant recognition without context, a familiarity that does not come from meeting, but from learning, from briefings, from stories that were never fully told. Daniel's eyes widen just enough to betray the shift inside him, because that name does not belong to the living. It belongs to a line in a report, a notation in a file marked closed decades ago. He feels the weight of it settle, not as shock, but as clarity, the kind that rearranges everything in a single moment. Around them another Marine stands fully now, then another, slower this time, but deliberate, as if something unseen is guiding them toward a shared understanding they cannot yet explain. The room changes again, not louder, not chaotic, but deeper, heavier with meaning. Arthur watches it happen with a quiet disbelief, his eyes moving from one Marine to another as they rise. No command given, no instruction followed. Just recognition spreading like something remembered rather than learned. Daniel holds his position, his voice no longer needed, because the truth is no longer just as to carry. It is here now, in the open, fragile, but undeniable. And the name Arthur Calloway no longer feels like a question. It feels like something the room is just beginning to remember. The name does not echo out loud, but it moves through the room anyway, carried in the silence that follows like something remembered too late. Daniel feels it settle into place with a weight that is not heavy, but absolute. The kind of certainty that does not need proof because it is already aligned with something deeper than logic. Arthur Calloway was not supposed to be here. Not in this room. Not in this moment. Not standing under warm lights among names that had endings. Because in every version of the past Daniel had been taught, that name had already reached its conclusion. And yet here he stands, breathing quietly, holding a set of tags that should have been folded into history decades ago. Daniel lowers his voice again, but does not lower his hand. The salute remains. Unwavering. Sir, your file was closed a long time ago. The words are careful, not accusatory, not questioning, just placed gently into the space between them. Arthur's eyes flicker, not in surprise, but in recognition of the truth inside the statement. He nods once, slow, deliberate, as if acknowledging a fact that never stopped existing even when no one spoke it aloud anymore. I know, he answers, and there is no bitterness in it, only acceptance. The kind that forms when a man has lived long enough outside of recognition that he no longer expects it to return. Around them more Marines rise, not in perfect unison, but close enough that the pattern becomes undeniable. Chairs shift back, boots find the floor, posture straightens, and still no one gives the order. It spreads like memory rather than instruction, each man responding to something internal rather than external. Daniel can feel it building. Not noise, not chaos, but presence, a collective awareness forming in real time. Arthur watches them now with something that almost looks like disbelief. His hands still holding the tags close to his chest, as if unsure whether to hide them again or let them remain visible. And in that hesitation, Daniel sees the cost of years spent being unseen, not rejected, not denied, just forgotten in a way that leaves no room for anger. Only distance. Daniel's arm remains raised, but his voice softens further. Almost to a whisper. You were listed as killed in action. The phrase lands with care, stripped of its official tone, offered not as a label, but as a piece of truth being returned. Arthur exhales slowly, his shoulders shifting just slightly, as if releasing something he has carried without noticing its weight anymore. That is what they were told, he says, his voice steady but quieter now. And for a moment his gaze drifts past Daniel, past the room, somewhere further back, somewhere only he can see, and the air changes again, not colder, not heavier, just deeper, as if the past has stepped closer without needing to be explained. Daniel does not press. He does not ask for details, because this is not a moment for interrogation. It is a moment for recognition, and recognition does not require every answer to be spoken. It requires presence. And that is what fills the room now. Presence in its purest form, the kind that does not come from rank or title, but from lived experience carried quietly over time. Another Marine steps into alignment beside Daniel. Then another, forming an unspoken line, their salutes rising one by one, not rushed, not forced, each movement deliberate, personal, chosen. Arthur's eyes move across them, slower now, taking each one in as if trying to understand how this is happening. How something that was never acknowledged has suddenly become undeniable. His grip on the tags loosens slightly, the metal resting fully against his chest now, no longer hidden, no longer shielded. And in that small change, Daniel feels the shift, the beginning of something being allowed rather than withheld. Arthur's hand lifts again, higher this time, not fully formed into a salute yet, but closer. The hesitation still there, but thinner now, worn down by the weight of what is unfolding around him. Daniel holds steady, giving him time, not rushing the moment, not forcing the gesture, because some things cannot be commanded. They must be chosen, and this is one of them. The room stands with him now, fully, silently, a unified presence without a single word spoken, and in that silence the truth that had been buried for years begins to surface not as a revelation, but as a recognition that was always waiting for the right moment to return. Arthur's hand rises the rest of the way. Not quickly, not with the crisp certainty of routine, but with a weight that can be felt before it is seen. His fingers align. Slowly, deliberately, as if each inch upward must pass through years that never acknowledged this motion. And when his hand finally reaches his brow, the room shifts again, not outwardly, not with sound, but inward, like something long held in silence has finally been given permission to exist. Daniel does not move. His salute remains locked, but his eyes change, the tension inside them softening into something steadier, something closer to understanding. Because this is no longer a question. This is an answer unfolding in real time. Arthur holds the salute for a second, then another, his arm trembling just slightly under the strain, not from weakness, but from the unfamiliar weight of being seen again. And in that small tremor, Daniel sees everything that was never recorded, not events, not details, but the cost of absence, the cost of carrying a name that no longer belonged to the present. The Marines around them stand fully now. Every one of them, their salutes raised, forming a quiet wall of recognition that surrounds Arthur without closing him in. No commands, no calls, just a shared instinct that this moment belongs to him. Arthur's eyes move across them slowly, taking in each face, each uniform, each silent acknowledgement, and something in his expression shifts, not dramatically, not in a way that would draw attention, but enough that Daniel feels it. The guarded distance beginning to ease, just enough to let something else through, something closer to relief, or maybe something deeper, something like closure that never expected to arrive. Arthur lowers his salute first, not abruptly, not with finality, but gently, like placing something fragile back where it belongs. Daniel follows a fraction of a second later, not because the moment has ended, but because it has completed its purpose. The room remains standing, no one rushing to sit, no one breaking the silence that now feels less like tension and more like reverence. Daniel takes one step forward, closing the last of the distance between them, his voice low, steady, carrying only to Arthur. You were never meant to disappear. The words are simple, but they land with a quiet certainty that does not ask for agreement. Arthur looks at him, really looks now, as if seeing past the uniform, past the rank, into something more personal, something shared across generations without needing explanation. His lips part slightly, and for a moment it seems like he might respond, like he might fill the silence with something that has been held back for too long. But instead he exhales, slow and measured, and gives the smallest nod, not in agreement, not in correction, but an acknowledgement that what has been said is enough. Daniel notices the dog tags again, resting openly now against Arthur's chest, no longer hidden, no longer guarded. And in that detail, he sees the final shift, not just in the room, but in the man standing before him. Because those tags are no longer something to conceal. They're something that has been returned, not by paperwork, not by records, but by recognition, a recognition that cannot be filed or archived, only felt and carried forward. The ceremony does not resume immediately. No one steps back into their assigned roles, because what just happened has quietly rewritten the meaning of why they are here. Not just to remember names that were officially recorded, but to honor those that were lost in ways no report could fully capture. Arthur adjusts his coat slightly, not to hide the tags, but simply out of habit. And for the first time since he entered the room, he stands not as someone out of place, but as someone fully present. Daniel steps back in a line, his posture returning to form, but something inside him remains changed, something that will not settle back into routine. Because he has just witnessed something that training does not prepare you for, something that does not fit into manuals or briefings, something that reminds him that honor is not always given when it is due, but when it is finally recognized, it carries a weight far greater than anything that could have been planned. And as the silence settles once more, No longer uncertain but complete, it becomes clear to everyone standing there that this moment was never part of the ceremony. And yet it is the only part that will be remembered. The room does not return to normal, not right away, because something has shifted too deeply to be undone by routine. And even as the speaker at the front clears his throat again, preparing to resume the ceremony, his voice does not come out the same. It carries a hesitation now, a quiet awareness that what just happened cannot be folded neatly back in a schedule or script. Daniel steps back into formation, but his eyes remain on Arthur, tracking the subtle movements of a man who seems unsure whether to stay or to leave, as if he has already received more than he expected and does not want to take more than he was ever meant to have. Arthur glances toward the rows of Marines one last time, his gaze moving slower now, not searching anymore, just taking in what is already there, the acknowledgement, the presence, the unspoken respect that filled the space without being asked for. And for a moment it feels like he might say something, like words might finally rise to meet the silence that has followed him for years. But instead he simply adjusts the collar of his coat, a small, habitual motion, and turns slightly toward the exit. Daniel notices it immediately, that subtle shift of intent, and something inside him resists the idea of letting the moment end without understanding it more fully, not out of curiosity, but out of something closer to duty, not the kind written in orders, but the kind that forms when truth appears without warning. "Sir," he says again, quieter this time, careful not to break the calm that has settled over the room. Arthur pauses, not fully turning back, just enough to acknowledge that he has heard. Daniel takes a single step forward, closing the space just slightly, not intruding, just enough to stand within reach of the moment that still feels unfinished. "You were reported lost, but you came back." The words are not a question. They're a bridge, an offering of space for something more to be spoken if it needs to be. Arthur's shoulders rise and fall with a slow breath, and for the first time, there's a hint of something heavier in his expression. Not pain exactly, but the weight of memory pressing gently against the surface. "I came back," he repeats, the words simple, stripped of detail, and yet they carry more than explanation ever could. Daniel waits, not pushing, not filling the silence, just holding it open long enough for meaning to settle where it needs to. Arthur turns a little more now, enough for their eyes to meet again fully, and in that look there is something different, something less guarded, as if the presence of the room has made it safe, just for a moment, to let the truth exist without needing to protect it. "They told your story like it ended," Daniel says, softly, and there is no accusation in his tone, only recognition of how easily stories are simplified when they do not fit into clean conclusions. Arthur lets out a faint breath that almost becomes a quiet laugh, not from humor, but from the strange familiarity of hearing his own absence described in words that were never meant to reach him. "Stories need endings," he says, his voice steady, grounded, and in that single sentence there's an understanding that feels both personal and universal. Daniel nods slightly because he understands that too, the need for closure, the way the world organizes itself around finished narratives. But standing here now, looking at a man who was written out of those narratives, he realizes how incomplete those endings can be, how much they leave behind without ever acknowledging it. A Marine near the back shifts his weight, the first small movement that signals the room is beginning to breathe again, but no one sits, not yet, because whatever is happening between these two men still holds their attention, still carries meaning that is not fully settled. Daniel's gaze drops briefly to the dog tags again, the worn metal catching the light just enough to remind him that this is not imagination, not confusion. This is real, grounded, present, and yet it carries something that belongs to a time far removed from this room. "You were never listed among those who returned," he says quietly. Arthur looks down at the tags as well, his fingers brushing them lightly, not hiding them, just acknowledging their presence. "I was not meant to be," he replies, and there's no bitterness in it, only a calm acceptance that feels earned over years rather than decided in a moment. Daniel feels that answer settle into him, not as something to fix or question, but as something to carry forward, because some truths are not meant to be corrected, they're meant to be remembered differently. Arthur lifts his gaze one last time, looking at Daniel with a quiet clarity that feels almost like gratitude, though it is not spoken, and then he turns fully toward the door, not in retreat, not in dismissal, but in completion, as if what needed to happen here has already happened, and anything more would risk undoing its meaning. Daniel watches him go, not moving, not calling him back, because he understands now that this moment was never about holding on, it was about recognizing what was already there. And as Arthur reaches the doorway and steps back into the light beyond, the room remains still for one breath longer, just long enough for everyone present to feel that something important has passed through them, something that will not be recorded in the program, but will stay with them long after the ceremony continues. The door does not close behind Arthur Calloway. It remains slightly open, just enough to let in a thin line of daylight that cuts across the polished floor. And for a moment, no one moves, as if that narrow beam of light has become a boundary between what just happened and everything that came before it. Daniel Hayes stands where he is, posture still locked in form, but his focus no longer on the ceremony, not on the podium, not on the rows of Marines beside him, but on that doorway where a man who was never meant to return has just walked out without asking for anything. And something about that feels unfinished, not in a restless way, but in a quiet pull that does not let him fully settle back into place. The speaker resumes, voice steady again, names continuing one after another, but they no longer land the same way, each name now carrying a question beneath it, a silent wondering of how many stories ended on paper but continued somewhere beyond it. Daniel hears the words, but they pass through him without anchoring, because his attention remains fixed on what just slipped out of the room. Not dramatically, not loudly, but with a kind of presence that leaves a space behind when it goes. A Marine to his left shifts slightly and lowers a salute, then another, and slowly the room begins to follow, not breaking the moment, but allowing it to settle into memory. Daniel lowers his arm last, not out of defiance, but because something inside him is still holding that connection, still anchored to the man who stood in front of him and carried a name that should have belonged to history alone. He exhales slowly, controlled, grounding himself in the present again. But the feeling does not leave. It lingers, steady and persistent, like a thought that has not yet reached its final form. The ceremony continues for several minutes, structured, orderly, as if trying to reclaim its original rhythm. But the air has changed, and everyone knows it even if no one says it. When the final name is read and the last pause of silence is observed, the room remains still for a beat longer than expected, not out of confusion, but out of respect for something that was never officially acknowledged. And then chairs begin to move, quietly, respectfully, Marines stepping back, voices kept low, the ceremony dissolving into small clusters of conversation that all seem to circle around the same unspoken center. Daniel does not join them. He steps out of line and moves toward the back of the room, his pace measured but purposeful, his eyes fixed on the doorway that still stands slightly open. The closer he gets, the more he feels it, that same subtle shift in the air, like the trace of something that has just passed through. He reaches the door and pauses for a fraction of a second, not hesitating, just acknowledging the threshold. Before stepping through it, outside the light is brighter, the air cooler, carrying the faint scent of trimmed grass and distant traffic, the world beyond the ceremony unchanged, ordinary, unaware of what just unfolded inside. Daniel scans the walkway ahead, and there, about 20 yards away, he sees him, Arthur Calloway, moving at the same steady pace, not rushing, not looking back, just continuing forward as if this was always the next step. Daniel steps out fully now, closing the distance. Slightly, but not calling out. Not yet, because something tells him that this moment still belongs to Arthur, that whatever comes next must be approached with the same quiet respect that defined everything before it. Arthur slows just a little, as if sensing the presence behind him. Not startled, not defensive, just aware, and then he stops, turning just enough to see Daniel approaching. Their eyes meet again in the open air, without the weight of the room, without the silent audience. And for the first time, there is space around them, space for something more personal, something not bound by ceremony or expectation. Daniel comes to a stop a few feet away, close enough to speak without raising his voice, close enough to feel that same quiet gravity that first drew his attention. Neither of them speaks immediately. The silence between them, now different from before, less tense, more settled, like something has already been understood without needing to be said. Arthur's hand rests near the dog tags again, not gripping them, just aware of them, as if their presence is no longer something to manage but something to carry openly. Daniel studies him for a moment, not as a Marine observing a subject, but as one man recognizing another. And in that recognition, there is no rank, no hierarchy, only a shared understanding that something important has just passed between them, something that neither of them will fully explain, but neither of them will forget. And as the wind moves lightly through the space between them, carrying nothing but the quiet of an ordinary afternoon, it becomes clear that the moment inside the room was never the end of the story. It was only the point where it finally became visible. Arthur does not speak right away, and neither does Daniel. The space between them filled with a quiet that no longer feels uncertain but earned, the kind of silence that follows something meaningful rather than something missing. A breeze moves gently across the open walkway, lifting the edge of Arthur's coat just enough to reveal the worn fabric beneath. The dog tags resting still against his chest, catching a soft glint of afternoon light. Daniel notices the detail again. But this time it does not feel like a clue or a question. It feels like confirmation of something already understood. Arthur studies him for a moment longer, and then finally speaks, his voice low, but steady. You did not have to do that. Daniel does not respond immediately, because the truth is he does not fully know why he did it. Not in a way that can be explained. It was not instruction, not expectation, not even decision. It was something closer to recognition before understanding, something that moved faster than thought and deeper than training. He exhales slowly before answering. I think I did. The words are simple, but they carry a quiet certainty. Arthur tilts his head slightly as if considering that answer, not challenging it, just weighing it against his own experience. For a long time, no one thought so, he says, and there is no accusation in his voice, only a calm observation shaped by years of absence. Daniel feels that land heavier than anything else that has been said so far, because it is not about what happened in the past. It is about everything that did not happen after, the acknowledgments never given, the names never spoken again, the silence that became permanent. Simply because it was easier that way, he shifts his stance slightly, not out of discomfort, but to ground himself in the moment. You came back, he says again, softer now, not as a statement, but as something closer to recognition. Arthur's gaze drifts for a second toward the open space beyond them, the distant trees, the faint movement of cars passing somewhere out of sight, ordinary life continuing without pause. I did, he answers, and this time there is something more in it. Not explanation, not detail, but a quiet acceptance that what followed mattered just as much as the fact that he returned. Daniel watches him carefully, because there is something in that answer that feels unfinished, something that does not ask to be explained but invites understanding. What happened after he asks, the question gentle, not pressing, just opening the door for whatever Arthur is willing to share. Arthur's hand moves to the dog tags again, his fingers brushing the edges lightly, almost absent-mindedly. I went home, he says, and the simplicity of it is almost disarming. Daniel waits, expecting more, but Arthur does not add anything right away. He just looks ahead, eyes focused somewhere beyond the present moment, like he is seeing a version of the world that no longer exists the way it did then. After a few seconds, he continues. People had already said goodbye. The words are quiet, but they carry a depth that does not need elaboration. Daniel feels it immediately, the weight of returning to a place that has already closed a chapter on you, the difficulty of stepping back into a life that has moved on without leaving space for your return. So you did not correct them, Daniel asks, not out of disbelief, but to understand the choice. Arthur shakes his head slightly, a small motion, but firm enough to carry meaning. It did not feel like something to take back, he says, and there is no regret in it, only a calm resolution that feels settled long before this moment. Daniel studies him, trying to grasp that perspective, the idea of letting a part of your identity remain in the past, because bringing it forward would disrupt something that had already found its balance. And in that understanding, something shifts inside him again, something that expands beyond this moment, beyond this man, into a broader sense of what service means when it is no longer visible, when it is no longer recognized, when it exists quietly without acknowledgement. Arthur looks back at him now, his expression steady but softer than before you saw it, though. He says, not as praise, not as surprise, just as a simple acknowledgement of what happened inside that room. Daniel nods once, not claiming anything, just accepting that it happened, that something in him responded to something in Arthur without needing to know why. And for a moment, neither of them speaks again, the silence returning, but now it feels complete, like a conversation that has reached its natural end without needing a final statement. Arthur adjusts his coat slightly and shifts his weight as if preparing to continue on, and Daniel senses it. That this is where their paths separate again, not abruptly, not dramatically, but in the same quiet way they crossed. Arthur takes a step back, then another, his eyes holding Daniel's for just a second longer. And in that look there is something that does not need words, something like acknowledgement, like understanding, like a shared recognition that will not fade with distance. And then he turns, walking away at the same steady pace, blending back into the ordinary world beyond the ceremony. Daniel remains where he is, watching until the figure becomes smaller, less defined, until finally it is just another presence moving through the afternoon, and yet the space he leaves behind does not feel empty. It feels marked, as if something invisible has been placed there, something that will remain long after the moment itself has passed. Daniel does not follow, not this time, because something in him understands that not every story is meant to be held onto. Some are meant to pass through you and leave something behind instead. He stands there for a while longer, the late afternoon sun stretching shadows across the walkway, the faint sound of traffic blending with distant voices from inside the building where the ceremony has already resumed without him, and yet it no longer feels like he has stepped away from something important. It feels like he has stepped into something else entirely, something quieter, something that does not need an audience to matter. He looks down briefly at his own hands, steady now, no longer holding a salute, but still carrying the memory of it, the exact weight, the exact stillness, the exact moment when it stopped being a gesture and became something real. And he realizes that what happened inside that room was never about correcting a record or restoring a name to a list. It was about recognizing something that had existed all along, something that did not disappear just because it was not written down, something that lived in the way a man stood, the way he carried silence, the way he chose not to take back what had already been given away. Daniel turns slowly and looks back toward the doorway, the same one Arthur walked through just minutes ago. And for a brief second, he expects to see him again, standing there, as if the moment might repeat itself. But the doorway is empty now, just a frame of light and shadow, ordinary again. And yet it does not feel empty. It feels marked, as if something unseen has been left behind, something that does not belong to the building or the ceremony, but to the space between people when they truly see one another. He takes a step back, then another, returning toward the entrance, but not rushing, not trying to rejoin the rhythm he left behind, because that rhythm no longer feels complete. On its own, as he reaches the doorway, he pauses just for a second, his eyes catching on a small detail near the edge of the floor, something that was not there before, or maybe something that had always been there, but only now became visible, a faint impression in the dust where a pair of boots had stood, subtle, almost nothing, and yet enough to hold his attention. He does not touch it, does not move closer. He simply looks, allowing the moment to settle without disturbing it. And in that stillness, something shifts inside him again, not dramatically, not in a way that changes his posture or his breath, but in a quieter way, a deeper way, like a truth finding its place without needing to be spoken. He steps inside once more, the sound of voices returning, the structure of the ceremony continuing, Marines standing, sitting, moving as expected, and for a moment it feels like nothing has changed at all, like the world has resumed its pattern without interruption. But Daniel knows better now, because he carries the difference. He carries the awareness that not every story ends where it is recorded. Not every name disappears when it is no longer spoken. Some remain, not in files or reports, but in the quiet recognition of those who are willing to see beyond what is written. He takes his place again, posture aligned, presence steady, but something in him remains open, more aware, more attentive to the details that others might miss. And as the final moments of the ceremony unfold around him, he finds himself listening differently, not just to the names being read, but to the silence between them, the pauses that hold more than words ever could. And somewhere in that silence, without form, without voice, there's the faintest echo of a truth that does not need to be confirmed to be real, that some men are never meant to return in the way the world expects. And yet they do, not to reclaim what was lost, but to remind those who remain that honor is not something given by record or recognition. It is something carried quietly, steadily, even when no one is looking, and sometimes, if the moment is right, if someone is paying attention, it finds its way back into the light, just long enough to be seen, just long enough to be remembered. And then it moves on, leaving behind not an ending, but something far more lasting, a quiet understanding that some stories do not close. They continue, not in words, not in history books, but in the way we choose to see each other when it matters most. A quiet military ceremony is interrupted by an unexpected moment when a young Marine recognizes something others cannot see in an old veteran who quietly enters the room. What follows is not just a gesture of respect, but a powerful unfolding of honor, memory, an unseen sacrifice that resonates deeply with audiences who appreciate emotional storytelling similar to animal stories. As the Marine's instinctive salute sparks a silent wave of recognition among others, revealing how true service is carried beyond records and beyond time. Through subtle tension, restrained dialogue, and cinematic pacing, this narrative explores the invisible weight of forgotten heroes and the quiet dignity of those who never asked to be remembered, drawing parallels to the emotional depth found in animal stories where loyalty and recognition transcend words. The encounter between the Marine and the veteran becomes a reflection on identity, sacrifice, and the stories that history leaves behind, offering viewers a deeply immersive experience that echoes the emotional structure of animal stories, where connection is felt before it is understood. As the story moves from silence to recognition and back to quiet reflection, it invites the audience to consider how many stories remain unseen, much like the hidden emotional layers often found in animal stories, reinforcing themes of honor, humility, and the enduring human need to be recognized. This cinematic narrative ultimately leaves a lasting impression by blending realism with emotional resonance, capturing the essence of storytelling that aligns with the heartfelt impact of animal stories, while focusing on the bond between a Marine and a veteran whose presence alone changes everything.